Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to let users log out, and we're also going to improve the user experience with things like redirects, flash messages, and more. Let's jump into the action. Okay, so in our previous lesson we set things up so that you can log in with this form up here, right? So if I log in with Brad and QWERTY, we see congrats, but then if I go back and manually visit the home page, I'm logged in. Now in this lesson, let's begin by making this sign out button come to life, right? It should actually destroy your session and the server should forget that you're, quote, logged in. So in order to get started, let's go find this in our HTML or Blade template. So in VS Code, just press Control or Command P and search for layout. So it's our layout blade.php file. And remember, starting around line 20, we have different code depending on whether you're logged in, else if you're not logged in. So let's just find the form element around line 26. And instead of the action being a hashtag, let's send it to slash, and I'm just making out a URL of logout. So slash logout. Cool. Now in the form, we know that we're going to need the @CSRF. And don't worry, this is the lesson where we're actually going to take a minute to explain what in the world this CSRF value is. Anyways, let's go ahead and save this file. And now let's set up a route for this URL pattern, right? A post request to /logout. So just Control or Command P and open up web.php. So this file lives in your routes folder. And to save typing, you can just duplicate this login line. So I'm just going to copy that, paste it, just change the pattern to /logout. And then on our user controller, let's call the method that's named logout. Now, this method doesn't actually exist yet. Let's go create it right now. So you can save that file, open up your user controller file, and let's just create a brand new method. So right above this public function, we can just create another public function. So public function, let's name it logout, parentheses, curly brackets. And in the body of the function, all we need to do is just call the global auth helper function, look inside the method that it returns, and call a method of logout, semicolon, and then let's just return a string of text that says, you are now logged out, semicolon. Let's save this and test it out. So let's refresh. Be sure to refresh so this sign out form is pointing to the correct URL. Once you refresh, you can click sign out. You are now logged out. And then if you manually visit the home page again, awesome. You can see we're receiving the guest homepage and header. Really quick, you can log back in. Awesome, and then you would need to manually revisit the homepage URL. If you just click the back button, it might not actually look like you've changed your login, logout status. But if you actually visit the URL with a fresh request, you should see the logged in header and homepage. Now, that process of having to manually revisit the homepage, that's super awkward. Don't worry. In about a minute or two, we're going to learn about redirects so that as soon as I click sign out, it doesn't take me to this awkward /logout URL. It would just automatically redirect me back to where I was. We'll learn about that in just a minute, but before we get to that, I want to explain what in the world, if we go into our Blade file, what in the world this CSRF token is. So this acronym stands for a cross-site request forgery. And the best way that I can explain what in the world that is, or what this is trying to protect us from, is to just show you a hypothetical, what a malicious user would do. So I've set up this example in CodePen. Okay, so what in the world's going on here? Imagine this is a malicious website. So it's not on our domain, it's some other website, like, badguysrus.com. But imagine on their webpage, they have a button that says something innocent, like click me if you like puppies, or click me if you agree that 2 + 2 = 4. And then imagine someone who is logged into our website in a different tab, right, in the same browser. So actually, let me log in really quick. So Brad, QWERTY, right? I'm logged in, but then imagine in a different tab, they visit this malicious website and they click this button. Awesome. So this is the error message you see if you did not have a CSRF token, and we are so happy that this request failed. I'm so happy that Laravel blocked this from happening. Let me explain what in the world is going on here. So remember, the web browser sends along any and all cookies for a given domain, right? So back on our website, if you inspect go into application, go into cookies, and then click on this domain. So, the 127, the local domain, we have Laravel_session. Anyways, a web browser is going to send any and all cookies for a given domain. So even if you're on, evilbadguys.com, if that web page somehow forces you or tricks you into sending a request to our good domain, well, your browser is going to send along all cookies for our domain to our domain. So it's not like the bad guys are intercepting our values. It's just that the bad guys are performing a request that we necessarily didn't mean to perform, right? If there was no CSRF protection, the bad guys, by getting you to click on this button, would have just gotten you to log out against your will. Now, worse than that, what if they weren't just logging you out? What if instead, we were building a banking website and we had a route on our domain of transfer money, and then, they said who they wanted to give the money to, and then usually there will be a hidden input. So type hidden value equals, $50 bajillion. You can't even see that, and then you click the button that says click if you like puppies, and then you just sent a request to the good innocent website without even realizing it. And because your browser sent along the cookie, that server would have trusted you. So, in long story short, the CSRF token, this is what protects us from this type of malicious action. So even if the user got tricked into clicking this button or sending a request along to our good domain, it's not going to work. Well, let me put this back to /logout. So not a 404, but they're going to get a 419. Essentially, whenever you send a post request in Laravel, Laravel is not even going to let the post request go through unless it sees the CSRF value in the form, right? So if you go to our website and if you look at your HTML, so if you right click on sign out and click inspect, here you see an input type hidden, the name is _token, and it's that CSRF value. The idea here is that the badguy.com website, it doesn't have access to the DOM or the HTML where the form actually lives. So the only way you would know that value, the only way you could possibly know this value is if you actually have access to this DOM, this page. So long story short, anytime you're working with a post request, anytime you could be changing data based on a logged in or authenticated user, right? A sensitive action. Laravel, for our own protection, requires us to have a CSRF token. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, really that's okay. Laravel is protecting you. Laravel is taking care of us. At this point, let's move on. So now let's improve the user experience by redirecting. So in other words, when I click sign out, I don't want to be taken to that awkward /logout URL. Let's just redirect to the home page. So watch how easy this is. Back in our user controller, we're calling the logout method, and then instead of return you are now logged out, just return and then call a function called redirect, semicolon, and then you just give it the URL that you want to redirect to. So / for the home page. Let's test it out. So save the file. If I refresh and I click sign out, awesome. Let's do the same thing for when you log in, right? So if I put in a correct name, I don't want to be taken to this awkward /login congrats message. I want it to just redirect me. So let me log out really quick just so we can practice. So let's go adjust our login method. So in user controller, right, around, for me, line 24, we have our login method. Instead of saying return congrats, let's say return redirect just to the /route. Let's give that a save and test it out. So now if I log in, awesome. There's no awkward in-between URL. The page just immediately looks like I'm logged in. I can click sign out. We are in business. At this point, let's learn how to show a message when you redirect, because typically when you redirect, odds are you want to show some type of message, right? So like when I log in, we would want to show a message here that says, congrats, you are now signed in. And then as soon as you refresh, that message would go away. Typically in the industry, we call that a flash message, right? It only sticks around for one request, and then it gets cleared out of the session data. Laravel makes this super easy to set up. So just go back into our user controller, and let's start with our login request. So if it was successful, we're redirecting to the home page. Before the semicolon, so after we call redirect, that's actually going to return an object, and we can chain onto it. We can look inside that object, so dash greater than, and call another method of with. So this is like saying redirect here with the following message. Now in the with parentheses, we call it with 2 arguments. The first argument, we get to make up a name for this type of message. So like you could make up anything, pizza, unicorn. Why don't we call it a success message? So success, I'm just making that up. And then the second argument is your actual text that you would want the user to see. So why don't we just say, you have successfully logged in. Okay, and then while we're here, let's go do the same thing for when you log out. So if you scroll up, remember we have our log out function. So return redirect. Before the semicolon, we're just going to say dash greater than and call the with method. Give it 2 arguments. So again, let's give it a value of success. For the actual text, let's say you are now logged out. Cool, let's go ahead and save that. And now we need to go tell our HTML blade template what to actually do with this or where to display it, right? Because Laravel can't read our minds. Laravel doesn't know if we would want to display the message in the header, right here, in the footer. So check this out. Here's what I would do. Go into our layout.blade.php file. And now it's totally up to you where you would want the message to appear, but I think it should appear right about here, right? Like below our header, but before the actual page content. So to put it right about here, here's what I'm going to do. In layout.blade, just look for the slot area. So in between where the header ends and before the slot begins, just right about here, here's what I would do. I'd say @if, and then you're going to have a parenthesis for the condition. But then below that, let's say @end if. And then for the condition, we just check to see if the current session data has a message with the label that we made up of success. So I would say for the condition session, call that helper function. It's going to return an object, look inside it, dash greater than, call the has method, and then we're looking for something called success. So only if this is true, then do we want to display HTML, right? If there is no flash message, we don't want to add even 1 extra character of HTML. But if this is true, let's say div, hit tab. Let's actually give that div a class of container and container -- narrow. Inside that div, let's have another div, so div tab. Let's give that div a class of alert, alert-success, and text-center. These classes have nothing to do with Laravel. This is just for CSS styling reasons. But in that div, now we would want to show the actual message. So curly brackets, double curly brackets to do something dynamic in a blade template. And then we would just call the session helper function, and the name of the, the data or the type of message, we named it success. So now check this out. If we save this file and test it out, so if I click sign out, awesome, there we see that flash message. Now if you refresh, the message is going to be gone. So if I refresh, it only sticks around for 1 session, like only 1 request worth, and then it's gone. But if I, log in, so Brad, QWERTY, awesome, you have successfully logged in. If you refresh, I'm still logged in, but the flash message has been cleared from session. Now, instead of a success message that's green, what if we wanted to show a red flash message for when we have bad news or an error? So for example, if I sign out, and then what if I performed an unsuccessful login attempt and click sign in? Instead of this sorry screen, we would want to redirect them back to the home page, but have this message be red that says invalid login or something similar to that. So to set that up, let's go into our user controller. Let's find the login method. Down here in the else, right, when we're returning sorry, instead of just sorry, let's return a redirect. So call the redirect function back to the home page, but then we're going to call it with, and then, 2 arguments, A, B. Instead of success, let's make up a word. Let's call it maybe failure or error. You could make up any word, but just so you and I are on the same page, let's say failure. And then for the message, let's say, instead of B, quotes, invalid login. Let's give that a save, and then back in our blade template, there's definitely a way to set this up in a cleaner fashion, but just for a quick and dirty example, you could literally just copy and paste and duplicate the if and if code like this, and then just change this so that what we're checking for is if the session has, and then change that to failure, if it has a failure message, and then just change this instead of success to the failure message. And then just for the CSS class, if you want it to be red instead of green, change this from alert-success to alert-danger. You can give that a save and test it out. So let me refresh. Let me perform a failed login attempt on purpose. Click sign in. Awesome. Invalid login. At this point, let's focus on the new user registration form. So for example, if you fill it out incorrectly, we already have validation messages here, so we don't really need a failed flash message, but what about if you fill out the form correctly, right? Because at the moment, it's going to take you to that awkward /register URL. So let's improve that user experience a bit. Go back into user controller, and we're looking down towards the bottom, so around line 38 for our register method. Cool, so down here, this is going to run if the validation passes, if it's successful. So instead of just returning the hello from register function, let's do this. Let's instead return a redirect to the home page with, so call the with method after the redirect. Give it two arguments, a comma b, let's say success. And then for the message, instead of b, it would actually be, let's just make up a message of, thank you for creating an account. And actually, let's take things one step further. So when you create a new user account, instead of just sending them back to the home page where they would still need to log in, let's log them in automatically with the user account that they just created. To do that, all we would need to do is log them in before we redirect them. So right about here, in between these two lines, if we log them in here, then by the time we redirect, they'll already be logged in. Now, this line of code is where we're creating the new user item in our database. So check this out. This is actually going to return that user. So what we want to do is instead of just having that value that it returns floating in outer space, we can save it temporarily into a variable. So at the start of this line, we could say $, and then you could make up anything, but I'm just going to name it $user equals whatever this is going to return. And then check this out. On the line right below it, we can just say, call the global auth helper function, and then call its login method, semicolon, and then in the login parentheses, just log in with the new user that we just created. That's going to send along the cookie session value, so the user's browser will actually be logged in automatically. We can test this out by saving it, and now you can see I'm logged out, but if I successfully register a new user, so let's say barks a lot at learnwebcode.com, password of QWERTY. If I click sign up, awesome, hello barks a lot, and the flash message, thank you for creating an account. And by the header, we can see that we have successfully logged in. If you wanted to, you could log out. Now, before we bring this lesson to a close, let's perform a few miscellaneous tasks that have nothing to do with redirects or flash messaging or user authentication. So down in the footer, let's change it so that the year is not hard-coded, but is actually dynamic. And again, this has nothing to do with the topic in this lesson, but if you go into layout.blade.php, down in the footer area, just get rid of the hard-coded 2022. You could have double curly brackets, and then just call the PHP date function and give it an argument of quotes, uppercase Y. Cool, so you can refresh. We still see the year, but now when the year changes, it'll always be the current year. One last detail, let's clean up our routes file. So for example, in web.php, we definitely don't need this /about URL in the example controller. So I'm going to delete this route of /about. Cool, we don't need that. And then at the top of web.php, we don't need to import this example controller. The example controller was just to actually learn what a controller is, but we can get rid of that. We don't need to import it. You can save that file. And then in your controllers folder, you can delete the example controller file. Right? So keep controller.php and user controller.php, but let's delete example controller. Now, where do we go from here? Well, in our next lesson, let me log in really quick. We're going to make this create post button come to life, right? Users that are logged in should be able to create blog posts. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you then.